Joining us now, E.W. Jackson, one of 3 Republicans running for the U.S. Senate nomination. That'll be decided in a June primary in Virginia to run against Tim Kaine. E.W. Jackson, the favorite, Prince William Chairman Corey Stewart, and House of Delegates member Nick Freitas, and retired General Burt. I always screw up his last name, Mike. I shouldn't. There's General Burt. Let's call him that. Mizrawa, I think. I got to get this down because I say it a different way every time. We're just going to call him General Burt for now. Do I practice it? I always say it wrong. Anyway, E.W. Jackson joining us now. Good to have you, E.W.
Well, great to be with you as always, John. And look, you know what? Just keep it simple. Just say there's one person in the race, and that way you don't even have to try to go through pronouncing names or any of that.
That would probably be easier, right? In fact, I asked the general.
The one person is me.
I asked the general to come on my show, and he wouldn't do it, even though I was at a bunch of rallies with him for Trump. And so he said he's not ready to talk to the media. I'm not sure what kind of a. I don't have. No comment, okay?
No comment from me either, John. No comment from me.
Yeah, let's get to the gun debate.
Yeah.
EW, and the president just now saying he's open to working with Texas Senator John Cornyn on something. You know, my position is if you go down the same path, EW, you end up in the same place. And so what can, if anything, as Second Amendment advocates, what can we do, if anything, to stop this?
Well, the first thing, John, and this, I know this is cliche because our hearts go out to all those people who were killed and injured down in Broward County, Florida. I mean, it's a horrible, horrible thing. But the first thing is there were warning signs about this guy. And there was apparently a call made to the FBI about him. I mean, given the spate of these mass shootings that we've had, when there are indications that people are concerned about the behavior of an individual, so much so that they're willing to go to the FBI, I think that ought to be taken seriously. And apparently, I guess it just wasn't. So before we start talking about new laws that we need to have and longer waiting periods, why don't we just double down on doing the things that we know make sense today? I mean, to me, this was preventable based on the laws we now have. And obviously, the second thing is we do have to make sure that our federal records are up to date on people who have criminal records, because we've even had a couple of instances in which people with criminal backgrounds have actually passed the background check and bought a weapon. But that's against the law. But you don't need a new law. You need to enforce the one that exists. The same is true for people with mental illness. We got to make sure that those things are reported properly and available to our law enforcement and to gun dealers so that those people are not able to purchase firearms. And I think we got to do all that, John, before we even give a second thought to, well, let's have an additional law. Let's have a longer waiting period. I don't mind telling you, John, I own an AR-15 myself. Mm-hmm. I've never pointed it at a human being ever. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not a dangerous I mean, it's dangerous if you use it improperly, but in and of itself, it's an inanimate object, which used properly is just a fun tool to go out and target shoot and that sort of thing. I don't hunt with mine. But, I mean, you know, people want to focus on everything, John, except the hearts of individuals. And look, if a teacher went into that school when they open on Thursday and wrote on the blackboard, "Thou shalt not commit murder," that teacher would probably be fired. And yet that's exactly the kind of thing that our schools need to start promoting. You know, the 10 Commandments and treating people properly, that it's wrong to go out and kill innocent human beings. How about that as at least part of the mix in our discussion here?
Well, look, that should be in the discussion, no question about it. There's a lot that has to go in this, along with these video games that kids are playing today and the violence in them. And I know a lot of people just blow that off, but I was telling the story last week. I mean, I've got 2 sons, 28 and 13. And the difference in the violence in the games that my 28-year-old played and my 13-year-old plays, which is a 15-year spread, is frightening. I mean, there's no comparison. Every time, Joseph's an athlete. You've met my son. He plays baseball, basketball. I mean, he works out every day. He's got practice every day. He's an athlete. And he's a fine young man, gets all A's and B's, no problems at all. just a fine young man. But every time I go into his room and he's playing that game with the headphones with his friends on it, somebody's getting shot. I mean, that's like all they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it does. But I think there's just a desensitization that goes with it. And comparing that to what our oldest son played, the graphic of the violence, there's no comparison to these games.
Well, look, John, I really believe this. This is part of my campaign. I believe that America is in a kind of spiritual crisis. Because when you throw out Judeo-Christian values and history and you say the founding fathers they were all a bunch of racists and let's ignore them, and, our American history is just one of exploitation. And so you fail to understand the noble tradition of our country, and you throw all of that out. You create a vacuum, and something's got to fill it. And unfortunately, right now, for our young people, it's being filled with all these violent games, with socialism, with a whole bunch of ideas that are really antithetical to who we are as a nation. Look, we're frontier people, and there's no question about that. We had to pioneer out this country. We had to fight and scrap, and I think that's in our DNA. But, the reality is we've always been a people who cared about our neighbor. We were forced to rely on each other and help each other. That was part of pioneering out this country. Mm-hmm. All of that seems to be lost in the miasma of you're right, this degenerate entertainment. We don't want God. Don't bring that up. We don't need prayer. And the problem is the inanimate object called a gun. And we had one guy kill 50 people with a truck, right?
Right.
So we're going to have truck control next. Is that the problem? Trucks? I mean, so at some point we got to get to the underlying issues here: family and values and decency toward other human beings.
Well, something is amiss when you have this number of shootings in this many schools. It seems like month after month. I mean, we just had one in Texas a few weeks ago, and people are becoming desensitized to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of breakdowns, a lot of blame to go around, but we need to fix it. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. I'm with E.W. Jackson, one of several candidates. How about that? Running for U.S. Senate as a Republican. That primary will be held in June for the right to take on the overwhelming favorite to win re-election. No question, Tim Kaine. He'll spend $50 million to win if he has to, in my judgment. So it's an uphill battle for any Republican who's a nominee. But that's then. Now is now. We got a June primary coming up. E.W. Jackson, how do you win this race?
Well, you mentioned it. I mean, Tim Kaine may spend $50 million. It will be $50 million wasted if he's running against me because he's going to lose. And look, John, I begin with two premises. Number one, there are enough conservative and independent thinking voters in the Commonwealth of Virginia for a Republican candidate to win, but that candidate has got to be a candidate who motivates and inspires people and gives people a reason to want to go out and vote. I've been telling people, Virginia, more than any other state in this country, shaped the founding of this nation. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Mason, Patrick Henry. We kind of define what it means to be American. We led 242 years ago, and it's time for, in my view, Virginia to lead again. And we've got to inspire evangelicals. We've got to inspire veterans. We've got to inspire independents. And frankly, John, we've got to give black voters a reason to take a look at Republican candidates and realize that what they've been getting from these Democrats is just a bunch of racial demagoguery with absolutely no progress, no improvement. Our cities are a mess. Our educational institutions in these poor black communities are a mess. Their children aren't getting a decent education. The crime and violence is at an all-time high, spiking all over the Commonwealth of Virginia and our cities. And the Democrats go in and point the finger at Republicans and conservatives and say, well, they're racist and vote for us. Well, it's time to call them out on that. It's time to expose that lie for what it is. And I believe that we're going to have a significant impact on black voters, and that's why I am Tim Kaine's worst nightmare. He does not want to run against me because he's going to have to answer for why, after 30 years claiming to be a champion for the poor and minorities, why have things gotten worse in these communities rather than better? So It's on, John. It's on in a very serious way. I think I'm the only candidate, frankly, in the race. And by the way, with all due respect to my colleagues, all of whom I like, I'm the only candidate in the race who really will defeat Tim Kaine.
How are you going to raise the money to be competitive in the June primary?
Well, I'm telling people now, and by the way, we're doing just fine. This race is important. I'm helping people to understand why it's important and what its potential is, and we are getting a very good response. I am happy with where we are in terms of our fundraising. I think we're going to show a very good report at the end of March. Of course, I just started on December the 11th.
Right.
So then you had Christmas come in. So really, we are just kind of getting into the real swing of our campaign here in the month of February. January, we was kind of gearing up. So I'm happy with where we are. We got a lot of work to do, and I'm working. But I think we're gonna do very well, and we're gonna be competitive, John, in the primary. People forget when I ran for lieutenant governor, I raised enough money to win. It was a convention, true, but I raised enough money to win it, even though I was outspent by some of the people in that race. I raised enough money to get the job done, and then I went on to raise $1.3 million between June and November in my lieutenant governor's race. So I think anybody who looks objectively would have to say E.W. Jackson is no slouch at fundraising. So we're going to do just fine. And once I win the nomination, of course, the race, and we're already doing this to some extent, will be nationalized because Tim Kaine is a target nationwide. He's the last icon of the Hillary Clinton era. So I think people will be happy to contribute to making sure that he does not return to the United States Senate.
All right, I like what you're saying. I mean, you're right. I mean, I had written you off in that convention. As you remember, Pete Snyder spent well over $1 million, and Corey Stewart spent about the same. I think you spent $250. I didn't think you could win, and you won really in a rout, actually. I mean, you got 42% on the first ballot or something, or 38%, and went on from there.
My closest opponent, John, after the first ballot was 2-1 behind me.
Right.
And if it hadn't been for some shenanigans with the counting, I think it would have been over in a couple of hours or so. But, we had a lot of game playing that went on, and they didn't announce what the actual count was. If you remember, on the first ballot, they didn't even announce the chronology, who was first, who was second. They just said, these are the candidates who made the cut, which I thought was horrible, and it prolonged the day. But you're right. I was way out ahead from the very beginning because we out-organized them.
That's true.
Frankly, we out-messaged them. And I think the same is going to be true in this primary battle. I just think, I'm the right candidate for the moment. And Tim Kaine, believe me, is quaking in his boots at the prospect of facing an American of African descent, a black man who grew up in the ghetto and knows what that kind of life is like, and has watched him squander opportunities to actually make improvements. And, of course, I'm going to offer real solutions to these problems that he knows nothing about, because all he knows about is keeping power and staying in office.
Well, you're a very inspiring candidate, no doubt. I've got a minute and a half. 13 indictments by the special counsel against Russian meddler trollers. What do you make of it?
Well, good luck prosecuting them. But I'm glad it's being exposed. I'm glad President Obama's incompetence when he told Mitt Romney that, we need to go back to the 80s and get our foreign policy back, is being exposed, that Russia is indeed a threat to the United States of America, and we need to take it seriously. But I think we need to get this prosecutor off the president's back, wrap this thing up, and move on. I mean, John, I'm incensed at the use of prosecutorial authority to persecute people because you don't agree with them politically, and I think that's what this is all about. And if something good comes out of it in terms of Russia, great, but leave President Trump alone.
Well, 15 months of constant investigations, and once again, there's no evidence of any collusion whatsoever. In fact, in the indictments, Rothenstein said no American is involved, no American is accused, including President Trump or anybody in the Trump campaign, etc. And even James Comey told the president he was personally not a target of any investigation. The whole thing is a complete scam. And you're right. It's done for political reasons, and they just need to, tell the truth. And if there isn't anything out there, say there's anything out there and move on, because this is becoming ridiculous.
John, I did not agree with President Obama on almost anything, but I never tried to in any way delegitimize his presidency.
That's true.
I wasn't part of that birther movement. I said, look, he was elected. I didn't like it, but he was elected. He's president. These people need to grow up and stop trying to undermine the Constitution and undermine a legitimately elected president and let him do his job.
We're out of time. I want to thank E.W. Jackson for being with us, U.S. candidate for U.S. Senate. You'll be able to vote for him if you choose in the June Republican primary in Virginia. E.W., if people want more information on your campaign or your candidacy, where do they go?
EWJackson.com, just like my name. Very simple, EWJackson.com. We're collecting signatures right now. We're still looking for volunteers, people to collect signatures, to sign our petitions. Got to collect 10,000 signatures to get on the ballot in Virginia. It is a heavy lift, and so we need all the help we can get. So, folks, get in touch with us, volunteer to help us out.